Welcome to the DCFTA session. It's going to be lifts and low voltage and machinery and electromagnetic compatibility and rock and roll. We are jumping right into the session. We have 90 minutes and we are going to be, as trade people are, related to figures and very precise, very concise and very respecting our time limit. First of all, thanks very much to the organizers and a special thanks to Jana for bringing us together, for bringing this panel together and coordinating all our different ideas and visions. We have thought and agreed among the panelists to have a two-track approach. First of all, we will go from the general presentation of the recent EU FTA implementation report, then more to a comparative analysis of our three DCFTA countries. The special idea is that we will present the outcomes of the focus groups on DCFTA assessment done in the three countries with various stakeholders, and the second round then, if we have time, we will have time, then we are going to jump into implementation. This is something that we heard in the previous panels, that many people focused during the last 5 years on legal harmonization. We were discussing compliance issues, legal harmonization issues, and what we would like to emphasize now is the implementation, which is sometimes very painful. I would like to present our panel. To the very left, we have Jana HERCEG. She is heading the trade section at the EU delegation here in Ukraine. And she will start with giving us the key findings of the EU FTA implementation report. Maybe Jana, I'll give the floor to you and then we go further. We can present further. Then we have Veronika, MOVCHAN, you all know her. She will give us the overall setup of the focus group research that was done, and then jump into the comparative analysis of the three countries and present the findings of Ukraine. Welcome, Veronika. We have Lali GOGOBERIDZE. She is contributing with the focus group findings on Georgia, as part of the cooperating think tanks who were initiating this research. We have Denis, he's representing the Moldovan part. And last but not least, we have the concluding remarks then from the business perspective. This should not be lacking. We have Alexandra, POPA, manager of the policy of Policy and Advocacy at the European Business Association from Moldova. So you have the very heavy burden to represent the whole business community now at this panel. So now we jump into discussion. Jana, you will start and you will have a presentation for us.
Yeah, so good afternoon. Is okay? Yeah, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to give you a short presentation, and when we discussed the setup of this panel, I saw that there were many experts who have details on all three DCFTA countries, Georgia, Moldova and Ukraine. So I thought it would be quite useful also to take it a layer up and give you a bit of presentation on how this work which we are doing in the DCF countries fits into the work that we are doing in the EU. So I would like to present you the main findings of the Commission report. It's the 2019 edition. And basically the idea behind these reports is that the European Commission is trying to present yearly what trade does and how trade delivers worldwide. So we are basically having already the third report in a row, and it is a snapshot of the situation, how it was during the year 2018. So this is something you should bear in mind, that when you look at the report or when you see it, this is something that is taking into consideration the situation as it was in 2018. But of course, many things have happened in the meantime, so you might not see the very latest developments, but it's very good for you to have a sense of where the countries were in the previous year. And this slide is just to give you an idea how varied our trade policy is. We have on the map, you can see that these are countries where the EU either has negotiations of free trade agreements or has concluded negotiations or applied agreements. So you will see that we really have like broad range of trade arrangements, 41 agreements with 78 countries, and I think that this is really an impressive work behind all of these agreements. But as Anna also mentioned, what I see as a trend lately in the EU, and you saw it with the upcoming new Commission, that it's not only about negotiations of the agreements, you also need to implement them. If you really want to ensure that they bring some benefits and that they materialize, you really need to ensure the proper implementation. And I think the report is part of this exercise, but also another strengthening of the role would be the new person that is supposed to be working closely with the commissioners on the implementation. So I think this is a thing that we are seeing much more prominent in the trade policy in the EU. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so it's a bit difficult for me to talk with the slides behind, but okay. So what were the main agreements that we had? Just for you, I don't need to go into much detail of that, but it's again to see, to have for you in picture where Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine fit in. So we have really like broad categories of DCFTA, but then also we have what we call the new generation agreements, where we really engage with trading partners like South Korea, Canada, Central America, most recently Japan or Vietnam. So we are really working hard on that. And this slide is also to give you a bit of idea how much, what share of the EU trade is actually captured through the preferential agreements. And you see that currently it's around 30%, but it will go up to 40% once Mercosur and Japan will be implemented. The rest of the world is still the bigger part, but I will come to it a bit later. It is thanks or due to the fact that China and US are not covered, and they are one of the key trading partners. So just for you, if you are really so keen to get a bit more insights also on your countries, the implementation report consists of different documents. And one of the key documents is staff working documents. It's 300 pages, but for each region and each country, you would have like a comprehensive overview. So I would encourage you to have a look also what has been done for your countries, because you might find some complementary information to the work you are actually doing also in your work when you are doing your assessment, to see how this is complementary to that. And then there is another part of the report which is, let's say, a lighter version, more for a PR purpose, so you would see some key findings, but this is, let's say, a bit, the content is not so heavy like in the staff working document. Again, I will not go much into detail, but for you, again, to capture and see how the DCFTAs are present and prominent in the trade flows in 2018, and especially on the agri-food, EU exports to world increase, and the DCFTA partners were representing the increase of 11%. So you can see that it is really quite a prominent proportion. And I think this is also, I think, what maybe Veronika will mention later on, that the delivery of the DCFTA, especially on the agri-food, was quite significant. Yeah, this is, again, I mean, to give you a bit more details on how the trade evolved, but I don't think I need to elaborate on this. It's just for those who are really keen to get more. Then, in spite of all the let's say, agreements in place, the main findings, what we can see in 2018, was that the trade was not developing so much as it was developing in the previous years. And basically one of the maybe key reasons behind was the drop in demand from South Korea. And then also Turkey had some difficulties economically, so it's affected considerably the flows. And another major impact, and I think you follow it all very closely, were the major developments on the trade arena and the global markets with US and China. So that also considerably affected the things. It's not working. Can you hear me now? Yeah. So then you don't see my face, but you hear the voice. That's that's a trade-off. Again, this slide I don't need to go into much detail, but you can just see that the DCFTA countries here. When you look at the annual trade growth rate by partner group, the DCFTA is the major block of all the partners. So it's, again, I think, the clear sign that the agreements deliver. If you go to the next slide, you see the same for the agriculture. So basically, this is, again, leading back to what I said, that one of the sectors that benefits from the agreements the most is agriculture. Yeah, next slide is, again, I mean, the same, just that it's not just a trend of last year, but it's actually something that is quite clear over the last, yeah. And one element that I want to mention, and it's actually quite relevant to our relations with Ukraine, the thing that we see also more often within our bilateral agreements is the activation of bilateral dispute settlements. So we haven't done it in the past that much, but lately we have launched dispute settlements, one with South Korea, one with South Africa, but with Ukraine we have also started the dispute settlement on wood export ban. So you can see that there are not only the rosy parts of the trade relations, but that the agreements also serve for solving our difficulties, and the wood ban is one of the clear examples. And I think the fact that we are moving towards bilateral dispute settlement is also changing, or I mean, is showing to the change of the approach of the EU that we are getting more serious with implementation of the agreements. Yeah, this slide is, I mean, this is just a summary of, I will not elaborate since I heard the alarm already, but basically when you look at the agreements, one of the key benefits, what I see also, is that they create a platform for us to talk about things. So for example, with the DCF countries, we have the whole series of committees where you can talk on a regular basis, and I think this already gives you a privileged approach to doing business in a way, more than you would have with any other country which is not involved in the agreements. But also we see that, for example, through the trade and sustainable development chapters, we engage our partners on talk, for example, on the labor issues or environmental issues, and it is very important that also the partners get receptive to those areas, which they normally maybe would not even consider in the traditional or, let's say, hardcore FTAs. And I mean, I think then we will have the speakers after to tell you more details on where we see that, for example, the implementation itself is moving fast, or is moving dynamically. It would be, for Ukraine, I just picked a few, but I think we will hear more. That we see that customs has been, in the area of customs, many laws have been adopted lately, and these laws, like for example, authorized economic operator, the single window, or others, or IPR border measures, all these should then simplify procedures and also create better and predictable framework for the businesses. So it should definitely help also, on one hand, increase trade, but also bring more transparency and reduce corruption. Then I had one slide on ACA, but I heard that there was a heated discussion already in the morning. So maybe I will not elaborate on this one too much, but I think what is quite useful for everybody in the room to remember the name of what ACA actually means, because I heard many different names and titles. So it is Agreement on Conformity Assessment and Acceptance of Industrial Products. So this is what we are actually talking about. And I don't think I need to really go much further now, because Taras covered a lot. Okay, so then just keep the slide in your mind and the name. On the TSD for Ukraine, as I've also mentioned, like really the institutional setup in the agreement gives a lot of privilege to also addressing issues like trade and sustainable development. And in our specific case, for example, with Ukraine, we address the key importance goes to the labor issues. For example, where we see that Ukrainians would like to work on the new labor law. One of the prominent topics we had discussed at the recent committee on trade and sustainable development in early November was also forest management, because we believe that there is a great space of improvement. So this is all for you to also see that the trade and sustainable development is very important in our relations. And we also, like the chapters which we have in the agreement, they capture or the support to the civil society, which can then work within the framework of the chapters. And the last slide, you have the link to the website of the European Commission, where you can find all the documents which I referred to. So I invite you to check the website and then also see the reports more in detail. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jana. Thank you for setting the frame, for giving us this overview with this very recent report. And I'm particularly grateful that you emphasized on this notion of a very deep and comprehensive free trade agreement that we have here. You were referring to the dispute settlement, to the trade and sustainable chapter 13, to many, many opportunities actually that this DCFTA provides for. And it's not, this panel is also about going into details, going to the substance of this Title 4, and not exclusively discussing, for example, this ACA. By the way, here in the audience, who knew what the abbreviation ACA really stands for? I heard and saw already today the most creative solutions. So it's very interesting, and us being practitioners in this field and experts in the field, we are very happy that suddenly everybody is so interested in conformity assessment. It's very interesting, but we are here to discuss things on a very objective way and not in an emotional way. So next speaker is Veronika. She will give us the broader frame of how this comprehensive assessment of DCFTA in the 3 countries had been set up, and then go into the details of the findings for Ukraine. Just one more remark. You all know that we just heard it, that the DCFTA title is a very comprehensive one. So we have 15 chapters in total, and of course we cannot cover them all. That's impossible within 1.5 hours. We therefore agreed with the speakers that we will focus on chapter 3, which is TBT, and chapter 4, which is SPS, and then we see where it takes us further. So, Veronika, the floor is yours.
Anna, thank you very much, and thank you everybody who joined one of these 2 parallel sessions. I'm really proud that we attracted so many people, despite so many discussions on this topic already. I'm really proud that I can talk on behalf of our entire team, on behalf of Michael Emerson, who is sitting behind, but he is the leader and the creator of this idea. We here, me, Lali, Denis, Michael, Kasa, and others, represent the project called Free DCFTAs, or long title Understanding Association Agreements and DCFTAs between EU and Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. And we are happy that we got support for this project from the Swedish government. The project has been started in 2015, and we just got the extension in 2019 for another 3 years. And one of the components of this extension is that we are switching from just trying to understand and explain the agreements and monitor the developments into assessing also what's happening, so joining the club of many other organizations who do that. So how we decided to do that? We run a series of focus groups, or we can call it closed discussions, because pure sociologists saying that we cannot invite different stakeholders in one focus group. We did, so it's our focus group, or it's external expert discussion on various aspects of DCFTA and actually association agreement in general. We started this exercise already no, it's not last year, it's still this spring. For me, last school year is definitely last year. Sorry, I am in different cycle. But yeah, we started it in spring, and we are continuing now and will continue next year. But what we have already done, we did the general overview of DCFTA. We did a focus group on TBT and technical barriers to trade, another focus group on SPSO, food safety standards and food safety issues. We had a discussion on financial sector, that's then summer break, and then we did another two already on energy and environment. But as we have energy, the next session, and environment still not fully processed by us, we actually will focus in our presentation on the first three and might be a slight touch of the fourth and financial sectors. And now, basically what we found. I will not list sector by sector. I will just give you my general impressions and messages, and will be happy to discuss then details and compare with my colleagues. First, and I forgot one. Do you hear me still? Okay. Basically, one more thing. Who are stakeholders? Whom did we invite to participate? It's representative of the state. I'm not sure that it really works. Representative, yeah, okay. A representative of the state, business, then academia, expert community, and definitely business and business associations and chambers of commerce, so that we try to bring everybody who monitor it more or less consistently. And what did we find? First, in each topic, basically, where we discussed legal approximation, we agreed that there is a substantial progress. So if we state in one point, it's definitely that Ukraine moved from this point to some other upper point. But this representation is very uneven. So in different sectors, subsectors, we have more or less progress. The financial is one of the most striking. It's very easy to define. In banking sector, huge progress, and all the rest of financial services are not moving, or moving almost unobservably, I would say so. But the same also concerns TBT, technical barriers to trade. Everybody recognizes we have a huge progress in adoption of technical regulations. We have a slightly bumpy adoption of horizontal legislation, and we have some questions in standards. We have harmonized standards, okay, done, but the whole transposition of European standards, the corpus of standards, is questionable. The same concerns SPS. We have some bright laws adopted, and they are key and they are important, but we are at the same time, the commitment is 250 legislative acts to be actually done. Already by the end of this year, mostly, some things are remained for 2001, but no, we are not at this stage, although we are progressed significantly. So everybody agreed that the legal progress existed, but if we start to dig deeper, it's not that we are in any place we are saying that we are done. This implementation is also actually the recognition that the country progressed, but here critique is even larger and the implementation is getting much more nuanced and less specific. However, the positive thing, we asked that mostly about TBT and SPS, but also slightly discussed in other focus groups, is the costs. What is now bigger? Is it the costs are larger than benefits and benefits are unobservable, or do we have some balance, or we already seen that the benefits are larger and exceeding the costs? Basically, for the future, everybody was very optimistic. They said that in future, definitely all categories of enterprises, main activities will gain more than lose, will spend. It will be not losses, it will be spending and investment in the future. But then we are discussing now, there are different views. Especially it was pronounced in agriculture, in SPS, where we have enterprises of different size. And if regarding large enterprises, everybody agreed that they are already actually getting the benefits of their investments in safety infrastructure, in the compliance with standards. For small enterprises, for farmers, it's questionable. It seems that some of them do it, they will definitely gain in the future, but now it's much more difficult for them. And it's in Ukraine, I suspect, and in other countries, it's even more pronounced. But still, if we talk, actually, it was in the first focus group. I will tell this message in the second part, on the last part and last point of my presentation. On general, the people agree that country has already started to benefit. We have this result in our focus groups, and we had the same result with much more representative survey of business involved in trade activities that we run for several years already. And it showed that about 30% of businesses lost, 30% of businesses gained, gained from the DCFTA already, and only 5% reported the loss. So the balance between who gained and who lost is 25 plus. 25% more businesses gained than lost. A lot just didn't notice yet, but still. So we have two different sources of information confirming that the country is gaining. But these gains are focused in trade mostly. Then we are talking to GDP. It's less, but it's clear link. If we have more experts, it's more GDP. But if we talk to the people level, to household income, to employment, here the gains are considered to be felt the least out of all macro indicators. So basically we see the first push, and it was like expected, the dynamic is very clear, that the first push is trade because the benefits and the opportunities and access is front-loaded. But then we need further push in trade to continue this speed, and then this push will spread out throughout the economy. So far we don't see this further spread out, very pronounced. Also, there still we have some positive assessments, but not as large as, for example, for experts with EU. With that, I want to conclude my things, and I still don't hear the sound, so I should be on time.
No. Okay, well, we are back. Thank you still for being so patient and staying with us despite this a bit annoying noise that we have. Probably the sound system here did not yet get the CE marking, or it's, I don't know. Thank you very much, Veronika, for giving us this insight on the overall setup of the exercise and the further findings on Ukraine. You emphasized on the legal harmonization in the first place also, and the benefits that can be already derived from this exercise that we've seen, and we will see what the dynamics are in Georgia and Moldova in the respective chapters. I give the floor to Lali and would invite you to give us the findings from Georgia, how this focus groups were set up, what the stakeholders were complaining about, what went well, what didn't go well so much, what the state of play in TBT and SPS is, whether we get food poisoned in Georgia. I doubt it, but let's see. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. So I will not go in details in organization of the focus groups because Veronika already provided the information, and these focus groups in all three countries are set up in the same format. Actually, this is very interesting exercise, very interesting, and I would like to thank our project again, because you are gaining a lot of information from stakeholders, from those people who are involved in implementation of this DCFTA in different directions. Actually, what is the impression of so we also invited in our meetings the representatives of governmental bodies and agencies which are involved in implementation of respective chapters of the DCFTA, also the private sector, which is the major player in terms of implementation, and we also invited the non-governmental organizations, civil society representatives and business associations, which in our point of view should play the more active role in implementation of obligations taken by Georgia in the different areas. So very important is that all representatives recognize that this is the unique opportunity for Georgia to integrate deeper in the Europe. But everybody recognizes, everybody noticed that the DCFTA is not like magic stick, that it can do everything. So everybody understands that joint effort and very hard work is needed in order to get benefit from this unique opportunity, which also increases the attractiveness for FDI in Georgia, and I will talk later about these opportunities. As for benefits, you know that Georgia has longer time frames for approximation of regulations with the EU legislation, and all participants thought that the larger benefit can be observed after 2025. Actually, we have larger benefit. I mean, I have to stress again, because we have already the first benefits, but larger benefit we can observe in the long run after the approximation and implementation of all the directives, especially in food safety, will be finalized. We have the time frame until 2027. For implementation of SPS regulations in Georgia, which are over 205. Just to talk about the TBT and SPS. Georgia doesn't have a very well-developed industrial sector, and therefore implementation of those directives which are under the TBT chapter is not very vulnerable for us. Legislative approximation goes well. The institutions, with among others, with the great support of the European Union, operate properly. So here, Kaha mentioned the market surveillance, which is an undividable part of implementation of TBT directives. So we have, this is not still in finally developed, very well developed, but we are developing this market surveillance system with the support of the European Union as well. Already started, the market surveillance body already started inspections, which are risk-based according to Europe best practices. and they already have the responsibility to withdraw products from the market. So legislative approximation and institutional development goes well. As for implementation in practice, like in SPS, there are some challenges. Notwithstanding that we don't have very well-developed industrial sector in Georgia, we have some industrial companies which are doing some things. Larger companies can more easily adopt to these regulations, but medium companies, they are facing some problems in implementation. Why? Because of the lack of information and knowledge of those directives, how to implement, and lack of financial resources which is needed in order to adjust the operation according to new requirements, and not only operation but also to have proper human resources. As for sanitary and phytosanitary measures, this is more vulnerable because more than half of Georgian population are involved in agricultural activities and food processing, agricultural production. And the SPS regulations touches upon every small farmer and every food processing plant. Those companies, especially small and medium companies, they have challenges related to the implementation of those regulations which are already adopted by the government. And again, here are the problems of financial resources and human resources. As for implementation, legislative approximation, Georgia meets the time frame, matches the time frame, and all regulations are adopted timely. But again, in SPS area, this is more challenging on implementation level in practice. However, those companies which already implement and already adopted their operation to new SPS requirements, and they are exporting to the EU some agricultural products, they already benefited from increased incomes, not by volume, but their production is more high quality, and the prices are higher, which are selling in the European Union countries. So actually all participants agreed that despite the difficulties in introduction of European norms in Georgian practice and in companies' operations, this is very good for the medium and long-term perspectives. Why? Because it increases this new the production of products according to these new standards, according to European standards, which sets higher requirements for product safety and, in brackets, the quality, increases the competitiveness of products produced in Georgia to other countries as well, to other markets as well. And they see that this is the opportunity for future to export the high quality products to other markets as well. Here, in case of both meetings, arises the importance of so-called business support organizations and non-governmental organizations. Everybody understands that the government organizations cannot do everything, cannot reach each producer, each farmer. Here is the role for NGOs, for non-governmental organizations, and for business associations, which should play and can play a greater role in this process. But their capacity, again, is not sufficient in order to go to the regions as well and to provide proper consultancy services. Actually, the government with this, the Chamber of Commerce of Georgia, with the support of European Union set DCFTA centers in the regions, which was supported GIZ. And here is some places in the regions where people can come and to ask questions and get the relevant information. But anyway, there is the need to enhance the role of business associations and business support organizations, which can boost somehow to the adoption of these new regulations and make more easy for business people to understand what is the regulations and what needed. To sum up, as for legislative approximation and institutional development, Georgia progresses well. As for implementation in practice, there are some challenges, especially for small and medium-sized companies. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Also for this, in general, very positive notion that you explained. It drew my attention to this, again, to this market surveillance issue that we already discussed in the previous session, and you know that it's a very hot topic currently also in Ukraine. Just lately, the long-awaited law on market surveillance has passed Verkhovna Rada, so now on the horizontal sphere it looks much better, but this is actually also an anchor point for this requested and claimed outreach. We heard it yesterday in the keynotes. Where is the outreach? We need to not only reach out and to make us understood on behalf of the DCFTA countries in the Western society, also among the economic operators, of course, and therefore this exchange is very helpful, but also in the regions. And this example that you gave is one, and market surveillance for this outreach is very helpful because this is actually something which immediately is affecting the consumer. It's about consumer protection. It's about the famous product safety regulation. So we have something which makes our products more or safer and which gives us better quality in food, in industrial products. And this is, I guess, the contact point where we can actually manage this outreach. We cannot manage this outreach with standards, with participation in CEN and CENELEC, or I don't know what working groups and international institutions, and we cannot reach it through the sectorial legislation, which is also highly complex, highly technical. The technical regulations, if you have had a look, they are not meant to create this outreach momentum with all the stakeholders in the general public at large. So we will see what is the success, what are the success factors in Moldova. If we have a look at the most recent expert data, they are quite positive. There was an increase of 29, I guess, 0.3% in the increase in export share of products exported to the EU compared to the 2018 period. And let's see whether this at all has something to do with TBT and SPS. I give the floor to you, Denis, to give us the findings from the Moldovan groups.
Can you hear me? Does it work? No? Now it's working.
Now it's
okay. Thank you. First of all, thank you for organizing this event. I think that it's important that we have, in a panel, we have 5 ladies, and finally we have, I don't know, like a positive discrimination, like somebody from my colleagues mentioned, which is a cross-cutting issue including for the association agreement and DCFTA. I think that Moldova is a special case for analyzing the impact of DCFTA because of various reasons, but the main ones are related to geographical proximity. We are closer to the European market, and more than that, we are exporting a lot of our goods to the Romanian market, which is a neighboring country. More than that, we speak about more than 91% of tariffs that were eliminated. So basically, we are somehow incentivized to export to the European Union because of these facilities. But at the same time, I think that it's also about the changing of the perspective due to geopolitical situation. It should not be excluded from the picture. This growth, which now reaches about 70% of our overall export going to the EU, is also a result of the policy of sanctions used by Russia. So basically, the diversification of the export, geographical diversification, plays a huge role in having this kind of, let's say, marriage between different factors. Geopolitical situation, geographical proximity, Romanian market, which is the language proximity, it's actually the same language, so basically we can reach consumers much faster than if we go to more sophisticated markets, like from those from Western Europe, France, Spain, and so on and so forth. So all these elements, they actually boosted these exports of Moldovan goods. Including the investments in industrial production and being part of a chain of production of cars. We are producing specific elements of the cars, and then they are exported to the European market, as well as other textiles and other types of goods. So Moldova is in a way becoming part of the production chain at a bigger European scale level. But looking at the DCFTA implementation in Moldova, I would like to pay attention to three dimensions: institutional, legal, and the one which is related to costs. Speaking about the institutional, and here I will also bring the results of our focus group, so that I will be maybe more detailed in what exactly is going on. So speaking about the institutional situation, we should acknowledge that Moldova went through various reforms at the institutional level. They started, the most important related to SPS, they started in 2018, and it's about the National Food Agency. It also developed with the support of external assistance strategy for until 2022, which somehow is linked also with the implementation of the legislation in the SPS area, because our deadlines are all 2022. So basically, somehow, probably it was on purpose overlapping like periods of the implementation of strategy and the last deadlines for the SPS directives to be implemented by the Moldovan side. At the same time, important changes took place in the TBT field, and it's about standardization, metrology, and conformity, the assessment and market surveillance. The biggest problem for this area is not the this institutional changes, but more the human resources. And as well, it's about the, for example, if we speak about European standards, then it's how these standards becomes popular among the business and actually applied, not only adopted as a national standard, because here Moldova stays quite well. We have about 90% of the standards adopted as Moldovan national standards, and we have several hundreds of costs, which is another topic of interesting confrontation of old perspective versus the new one, Europeanized one. And here is the difficulty is that we have still a mentality among some businesses that they should not break the relationship with the traditional market, which is CIS countries, specifically Russia. So they see the adoption of some GOSTs or maintaining the usage of some GOST as a way into the Russian market, CIS market. So institutionally speaking, the biggest challenge for Moldova are the human resources. They are It's about line ministries, both line ministries and agencies. It's not only about the agencies which are dealing with the proper work in implementing the policies. Legally speaking, Moldova is, I already mentioned about the standards which are well advanced in transposition, as well as the SPS directives, though here we have the problem of when they were included in the association agreement. When it was ratified, we didn't have yet the annex included in the document, so it was only included in 2016. So basically, we have more than 200 of directives which started to be implemented starting from 2017, actually. And because the institutional reforms didn't take place, so the National Food Agency was not reformed, all these processes started in 2018, basically. We have few years when we lost this probably momentum as well as time to adopt quicker these directives. But here again, it's not about the speed of adopting these directives. It's also about the preparation of the entire economic, let's say, framework to have these directives working properly. And here is the confrontation with some, probably with some businesses that as I mentioned, are still interested in having in usage of some regulations that include ghosts. So the problem of Moldova is that we have a lot of old regulations in parallel with new regulations, European ones, but they are clashing between each other with some occasions because the old regulations include ghosts, or they simply logically are confronting the European regulations. So we should, in a way, find solutions how to get rid of this conflicting moments. But this should be done in the consultation process. And I remember myself talking to people from the standardization field, and I was told that unfortunately sometimes because of this interest to have as soon as possible the EU standards adopted, so the interest was put on speed and not on consulting of these standards and having the business involved in the process of like co-opting the standards. And I think that here is a big problem for the entire sector, because if it is top-down approach, then you will not really have a business which is fully interested in actually changing their view on how to produce, maybe investing their own money or looking for investment so that they can produce according in line with the European standards. Speaking about costs, I would like to mention that European Union is as responsible for the implementation of association agreement as the three countries, and including Moldova. This was mentioned in the previous panel, and it is delivering assistance. But sometimes the problem is not really on EU side, but rather on Moldovan side. And I will bring you several examples. And this is about the European Neighborhood Program for Agriculture and Regional Development. So it was already ready to supply financial support for Moldova. It's about 64 million euro, from which 54 are budgetary support. So speak about huge budgetary support that could be simply very helpful for Moldovan struggling budget. But because we had the suspension of the financial assistance in 2015-16, and then in 2018, this money really didn't reach Moldova. So it's not only about the preparation of the from the legal point of view or institutional dimension, but it's actually about politics and how politics can damage actually the modernization of the quality infrastructure, which is what we talk actually right now about. Maybe I would like to also say something about the answers that we had in the focus group, so that I will provide you with some insights on Moldovan side. So on ghosts, as I mentioned, we have different perspective, and there are still traditionalists, producers who are very much linked to the traditional markets. They don't see any reason why they should change. their production, so they see the costs for changing the equipment and modernizing their production as too big for them, so they keep to have their business plan as in the past. Then we have an interesting approach towards the European standards in general. So if these standards and regulations are very important for the export-oriented companies, which we have right now about 1,300 companies, then they're not so interesting for the producers at home, because they see this as huge cost for them, as well as for the importers who are importing from the traditional markets, from Russia, because they may face the contradiction of in terms of conformity. So we have these two-side twists from the producers and the importers' sides. Then it's also, again, it's about the complaints with regard to technical preparations in infrastructure, in quality infrastructure. And here we speak about the lacking laboratories or the underdeveloped or under-equipped existing laboratories. So there is a lot of interest to outsource the necessity of having conformity, and it means more time, more money, so less profit. So, and apart from that, every time when we asked our participants, both on TBT and SPS, about which are other problems, they mentioned human capacities. So it's about the institutional level, and they see this as a huge problem. And in addition to that, maybe it's also important to emphasize that that there is a very small understanding about the SPS particularities, and it's about the production of the small producers and small farmers, and the exemptions which exist for them and for the groups. Or for those individual enterprises that can ask for recognition from the EU side, based on checks from the European, from the DG Sante administration, and so on and so forth. So our participant mentioned that there is a lacking understanding of these two groups. That actually, in case of small family, and we all know about that, they are quite. There is a very lax. Provisions about them being in conformity with the SPS standards, so it's a kind of relaxed hygiene request, and at the same time there is a less state control, because this in a way is seen as a very sensitive, vulnerable groups. And more than that, we speak about, in case of Moldova, we speak about 240,000 of people who are involved in this home production, because of big number of rural citizens. It's about 60% or more than 60% of the population. And more than that, it's also related to the fact that from this 240,000, 64% are the producers of the agricultural goods in Moldova, and 54 are the producers of livestock. So it's a very sensitive sector, and we noticed through our focus groups that unfortunately the understanding is lacking. So I think that these are the main conclusions on Moldovan side. And in general, in my view, and maybe this is also related to the implementation, I think that strong institutions are more important even than the adopted legislation, because otherwise you have this really handicap approach that you adopt a lot of legislation, but then you don't have actually people to make sure that these laws are implemented properly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Denis, that you walked us through the successes and the shortcomings. Some shortcomings already mentioned. You walked us through basically the whole quality infrastructure landscape in Moldova, and there are for sure some problems which are the same or similar problems and shortcomings also in the two other countries. We will hear now the voice of business. Alexandra, please, and if you would kindly also focus a little bit what we already heard from Veronika, what are problems especially for SMEs, how do you feel the readiness of institutions to consult you, where do you get the information, is there enough support in this regard? what is with conflicting standards. So you have the whole list of questions. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you. Oh, okay. Good afternoon to everyone. My name is Alexandra. I represent the European Business Association. It's a non-profit organization created in 2011 under the auspices of the European Union delegation in Moldova. Having as a members the biggest investors in Moldova and the big companies, Moldovan companies, EBA Moldova has the aim to promote private business between European Union and Moldova and to contribute to the development and improvement of the business environment in Moldova. And as Lali said, the importance of the business support organization is very high in Moldova, because this kind of organization, they represent the voice of the private sector in the communication with the state institution. In this respect, starting with 2015, we focused on the proper implementation of the DCFTA and mainly proper association agreement and mainly DCFTA by submitting a series of business-oriented recommendations in order to transpose the European legislation into Moldovan legislation. Also, we provided the European and international experience, best practices, and practical implementation of the relevant legislation. We participate in different PPD where we can expose and express our concerns and our recommendation to the government and other state institutions. Also, we develop a concrete legal proposal in various sectors covered by DCFTA, such as food safety, customs, waste management, labor legislation, and so on. With respect to the DCFTA implementation, I would like to mention that since this agreement was signed, DCFTA offered various advantages both for Moldovan society but also for businesses. And what is very important, and by the way it was already mentioned, that exports increased, and it increased very much. For 2018, our share of our export to the European Union represent 69%. Imports from the European Union, 49%. So the European Union is the main trading partner of the Republic of Moldova. During the implementation of this FTA, domestic products became more competitive. This contributing to the growth and the diversification of our Moldovan exports to the European market. Also, the quality of our products was improved. Due to this FTA practical implementation, due to the increase of the export and increase of the diversification of exported products to EU market, many Moldovan companies started to invest in quality, thus upgrading their technologies in processing and producing. Many companies implemented a food safety management system based on the European Union standards and requirements and obtained necessary certification. This means that being certified according to the European standards, any company can export not just to the European market but worldwide. The logistic net was also improved. If previously the economic agents from the Republic of Moldova were exporting just to the wholesalers, currently they deliver their production direct to retailers, having in this respect a more advantaged and better contract conditions. Also, with the assignment of the association agreement and DCFTA, the process of improvement of the quality of Moldovan policies was launched. which changed the entire business environment in the Republic of Moldova. A series of reforms were implementing, aiming to reduce the red tape in Moldova. Such reforms as state control reforms, Permissive Act reform, digitalization of the public services, and so on. All this lead to improve and to facilitate the conditions of the companies in startup and running their businesses. According to the World Bank Doing Business report for 2020, Moldova ranks 48 out of 190 countries in ease of doing business. Nevertheless, there are a lot of issues, challenges that business is still facing in their entrepreneurial activity. The main issue is related to food safety. Moldova currently is still lagging behind with the implementation of the necessary animal traceability system, animal pest control, laboratory management, and proper accreditation. Also, there is a need of investments to establish a production chain and technological process adapted to the European standards. All these deficiencies does not allow to Moldova currently to obtain the right to export animal origin products on the European Union market. Also, we are lagging behind with our national action plan in order to related to the obtaining of the right to export the poultry meat and B category eggs. Another issue to face food safety issue is the obligation of double certification procedure for the same product imported from the European Union, which already have been certified by accredited laboratory from the European Union. And another issue is lack of risk assessment mechanism for the food products within the border control. Waste management is another key challenge. Currently, in the Republic of Moldova, there is a charging of the environment pollution tax, which is not levied in any European countries. In European Union, there exists a principle that polluter pays, and all those taxes, all those tax fees collected from this tax are directed to the environmental projects. And also are transferred to the private collective organizations aiming to finance these projects and to develop the waste collection system as a part of the extended producer responsibility principle. In Moldova, in this respect, it is a need, first of all, to draft and to approve a full tax refund mechanism for those companies who already implement the EPR system. Second, all those taxes collected should be transferred to the National Ecological Fund for the environmental projects, and the third one, when the EPR system will be implemented, all this environmental pollution tax should be abolished. Customs evaluation. With respect to custom evaluation, many importance are still uncertain how to declare properly the value of the imported goods. This is due to many unclear and non-transparent rules and factors to be considered with determining the value of the goods. Recognition of the authorized economic operative status. As long as our Moldovan status is not recognized by the European Union, Moldovan companies will continue to bear additional financial costs for the trucks quicking at the border with the Romania and delays, financial costs for the delays of specific contracts like just-on-time contracts. Justice sector reform, our main, justice sector reform, our main challenge in Moldova. According to the perception of the business environment, insufficient independence of the judges and lack of control of the prosecutors' activity is the main problem, and this raised to other concerns of the business community as selective and politicized justice, judicial favoritism towards certain parties, failure to comply with the commitments made to European investments under different agreements signed between Moldova and the European Union. I mean the agreements on investment agreements and many others. Well, you asked me about what would be the main, probably I would call them priorities for businesses. First of all, it will be the improvement of the justice sectors and the rule of law. Private sector need predictability. If you want investors to come in Moldova, they need to know that laws, business-related laws, won't change in one night. Also, we need the primary legislation was transposed and improved, but we have to improve our secondary legislation as to further implement all the legislation. Strengthening the capacity of the central public authorities and mainly of the National Agency for Food Safety. And transparency. Transparency in elaboration and amendment of different legal acts. Well, mostly we participate in this process. It is open to all legal acts or draft laws are published on our specific web page, and we can express our position. Also, we can share with our recommendation on, or as I said, on different public platforms, private public platforms. We as ABA, we will continue to improve, not to improve, but to contribute to the improvement of the business legislation in Moldova according to the European rigors and standards, and we'll do our best to support businesses mainly oriented for the cooperation with the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. This is such an impressive performance that you just presented to us, what you all do to support economic operators in Moldova to take full advantage of the DCFTA. And dear audience, did you notice actually that Alexandra mentioned the topic of waste management as part of her speech, which is not exactly a part of DCFTA, as we all know, it's part of sectoral cooperation. But this is very interesting because it shows us that that questions of sustainability are more and more also relevant for a good performance and making good business, and will be increasingly, as rumors say, also when it comes to an updating of the DCFTA and the provisions under it. So we have a little less than 50 minutes, no, 11 minutes we have left. So actually my plan for this session was that after this very comprehensive first round, where we already got from harmonization issues that were presented from all three countries to some implementation aspects, we would go into more details of implementation. I will have one question for each country, basically, recommendations from the business side we already had, and then I would suggest that we give Jana the opportunity to comment as a last speaker, and afterwards we still take questions from the audience if there are any. So implementation, we talked about legal harmonization issues a lot. We heard this morning by Mr. Wahl from Norway how this is an ongoing task, and we heard now during the panel also that it's not done in our sphere of DCFTA with aligning to horizontal legislation, but that will be more focus be given to the sectoral parts, and also from the EU side, I believe, to check this also, the performance on the sectoral legislation. This is a very complicated task. In Ukraine, ACA related as well, not only for the three priority sectors, but for each sector there is also linked legislation which also needs to be implemented. So it's a huge, huge exercise. But nevertheless, we will start the second round of questions, where I would like to ask you to be very brief, 1 minute more or less, with Georgia. Lali, you referred already to FTAs concluded with other third countries. So we heard a little bit about Georgian experience, and we know that Georgia recently concluded FTAs with China, with Hong Kong. You also have FTA signed with Turkey. So within this whole concert of FTAs, where does the DCFTA stand, and what would you recommend also as a next step?
Thank you very much for your question. Yes, Georgia has the free trade agreements with number of countries. Georgia has FTAs with the CIS countries, all CIS countries, and FTA with Turkey is already old FTA, so we have it for numbers of years. But the very interesting and important developments after the EU-Georgia DCFTA and association agreement was the conclusion of free trade agreement with China. First was China, and this FTA was concluded in 2017, and since 2018 it is in force. It was very interesting process. So it was initiated by China after the conclusion of the association agreement with the European Union and the DCFTA. It was initiated by China, and it was completed, these negotiations, almost in 1 year, in a very short time. So we have with China very preferential FTA. 91% of goods are the tariffs are abolished. For 3%, it's going to decrease, gradual reduction, and 6% China did not remove the tariffs. So actually, it's very interesting. And Hong Kong, we finalized last year, and it entered into force in 2019. We cannot have now the results of Hong Kong-Georgia free trade agreement, but with Hong Kong, we have zero tariffs on everything, because the Hong Kong has such type of commitments in WTO as well. With China, our export increased, especially export of wine, and became third importer of our wines after Russia and Ukraine. But as for, if we compare the European Union DCFTA with others, so I can say that actually EU has the highest share in the Georgia's foreign trade, about 30%, 20 from 27 up to 30% during years, and the export and the turnover is growing, and the import as well. As for China, China is, as a country, is number 3rd trade partner for Georgia, and as for Turkey, with whom we also have the FTA, Turkey is the first partner, our first partner. Actually, the export diversification with the European Union happened in after 2006, when Russian Federation imposed the ban on our agricultural products, and since then Georgia already Georgian producers started to find new partners, and they started export to the European Union countries. So the shares of those countries with whom Georgia has the free trade agreements in terms of export is increasing. Export from Georgia increases. As for import, you know that Georgia liberalized its import policy in 2005, when it removed all tariffs except some of them for import of products. So this is the situation now. And investment from China is also growing despite the overall reduction of FDI in Georgia, which means that the DCFTA somehow boosts Georgia's inflow of foreign investments from China as well, because they are putting their money in different production, and they are producing products according to European standards, and they can trade with the EU through us.
Many thanks. Lali, this again emphasizes what we discussed earlier, how adapting to the standards, taking over basically the whole provisions on quality infrastructure in the TBT field makes our DCFTA countries and economies more attractive also for third countries for worldwide trade. Okay, coming to Ukraine, we also want to dig a little deeper into implementation. We discussed legal harmonization. Now, what is needed, Veronika? Very briefly on the implementation side, where we still see some substantial shortcomings. Implementation is about teaching, explaining, is about institutional transition, is about trial and error and again setting up and trying again and explaining more and reaching out. This is all implementation. It's also very costly. This is what we already touched upon. Do we have, does Ukraine somewhere have the money foreseen to equip laboratories and to do all this very expensive also technical exercise? What is needed next, Veronika?
Hello. Oh, yes. Basically, I understand we are still in the domain of TBT and SPS in the implementation. I think here we have some gains and still some challenges as everywhere, and you already highlighted some of them. And actually, then I was listening to Denis, I understood that, these are the challenges that we heard also in our focus groups. It's staff issues for sure. To train inspectors, to train staff at the laboratories, to have enough staff in their even standardization bodies and activity, involvement, equality, technical remittances, all requires skills, and this is the challenge. The same concerns the SPS issues. Also, definitely we need train also business to do that. For example, HASP, there was a big talks about HASP for years. Finally, we have legally everything in place. But then we start talking to businesses, they say, yes, we do, but sometimes we are quite formal. We still do not feel everything, and because it's costly, we try to make these costs as small as we can, staying still in the legal field. But at the same time, on the implementation, I like the example of animal origin products, and I like the example of exports of animal origin products to EU, not because it's so important for exports, basically, but it's very clear, it's example, because there is a huge requirement for EU for verification, and only after EU verification the business can enter. And Ukraine, what we see now, Ukraine has, in terms of categories of products verified, if you look at these third country establishment lists, it's 29 different categories. Ukraine had at least one enterprise, but basically more, in 19 of these categories. For example, Turkey and Russia have less categories, not talking about Georgia and Moldova, for which is a huge problem. And Ukraine increased this number of categories from 11, I think, in 2013 to 19 now. In terms of allowed establishments, the number basically tripled. It's twice more establishments for food products and much more for establishments for animal byproducts. There's sometimes one firm in different establishments, so I'm not talking about firms, but actually the countdown of establishments. And more interestingly, that these for poultry case, which is very specific and sensitive for EU, but then the talks were completed. Actually, Ukraine didn't have booming exporting industry. It was just the beginning of trying to supply domestic market and dreaming maybe to some exports. Now, if I trust the MHP advertisement on their sales domestically, they just put that this poultry meat is exported to 62 countries. Which is, even if they counted all 28 US one by one, it's still really impressive. So yes, the implementation is a challenge, but this challenge is doable if you have the goal.
Now, one very brief question on Moldova. We heard that there are reflections also engaging towards ACA. What is the situation in Moldova? Are there priority sectors, or what can you tell us on the situation?
Well, I can tell you that the answers from the focus group, and it will be very short. There is a very small familiarity with the concept of ACA, so it's really not a big issue in case. But I see that that my colleague wants to add something on that. But from focus group, business is not really aware, and then maybe we can have an answer from the business. So.
Very brief answer from the business.
Indeed, the Republic of Moldova, we have in our national action plan for the implementation of association agreement this provision that we have to sign this ACA agreement. Currently, the Republic of Moldova is looking, with the support of the European Union, is identifying the potential scope of the agreement, the potential sectors. And we have a deadline till the end of December 2019. We have to identify just the sectors, and after that to draft a feasibility study, and then we will go with the negotiations. Businesses, yes, they don't know about ACA agreement. Those companies who want to export, they obtain certification and then they export. Of course, the agreement, when it will be signed, will facilitate and will reduce over different financial costs and burnings for the business environment. But when it will be, I don't know.
Many thanks for this answer, for this brief answer, Alexandra. Then we can engage in some in some peer-to-peer learning on ACA with Ukraine, on market surveillance with Georgia. This would be already a tangible outcome of this panel. Now, I would like to give the word, one last word and remark to Jana, maybe going away from ACA, but more focusing on the further outlook, possible updating of the DCFTA, maybe also on the legal sphere, on envisaged more focus from the EU side and support also, as we talked. What would you like to? You can basically pick one of the topics and comment.
I'll try this one. There's only one left. No, I think when we talk about implementation, enforcement, I think for me there are several angles. One angle is the legislative part, so I think that's very important that the countries work on the legislation which is compliant or which is bringing them closer to the EU acquis. And what I witness, at least in Ukraine, it's this turbo speed. Is bringing many legislations in many areas which were long needed, but I think the work had been done already also in the previous governments. The second element which I see is the enforcement, because for me the work doesn't end up with the legislation in place, and that's where I see in many areas that actually we have the legislation in place, but then it's somehow there, but nothing happens afterwards. So I think it is very important that also the institutions that are in charge of the implementation pursue the homework and they work on the implementation and on the enforcement, because only then you can see real results. If you just end up with the piece of legislation in your drawer, I think you will not bring any change. And then third element, which is very important for us, especially, I mean, working on the trade area, is that the countries do not make any steps which would take that away. Because we see that sometimes you do an excellent work and then all of a sudden you have some pieces of legislation which completely undercut the credibility of the countries. For example, I don't know, I mentioned the wood ban. We see that there are some legislations on the VAT refunds for soybean and rapeseeds. We see also crop protection samples blocked. So I think all these steps, which might look minor, like locally when you look at them, they send signals to investors or potential investors that they should think twice before they come to the country. So I think this is very important as well. And I think the last piece, which is always something we repeat, that the countries have to work on their predictability, on the stable legal framework, because only then you will have people who will have trust in the countries and they will be ready to come.
Implementation is the bottom line of our panel so far. Dear audience, are there questions? Please speak up. Oi, we killed the vibe. Okay, so thank you very much for being so patient with us. We almost made it. Sorry, Jana, almost, but it's also a very complex story to discuss with these 15 chapters and so many issues and all the countries. Implementation, it is, so whoever listens to us also on the live stream, I know that there are some people in Chisinau, in Tbilisi, in Berlin, in Brussels, whoever has a possibility to engage, to outreach. We, as GIZ, for example, we drive with the DCFTA bus from Ukraine to Moldova, and next spring we will come to Georgia, to the smaller cities, to explain economic operators what it is, the DCFTA, what their obligations are and what the benefits are. This is very helpful and very well appreciated. So whatever you can do also to support on the implementation side, please do, because this is the bottom line and the positive note on which we will now end also. Thank you very much for this panel with positive discrimination, which I would also again like to emphasize to Soriana, because I remember very well the DCFT panel last year, which was exclusively male, and so see how the world changes. Thank you so much.